I never believed in God until I started working at the Vatican. More specifically, until they assigned me to guard room 0. That's not a designation you'll find on any official map or tour guide. It doesn't exist in the public records, but if you work security in the deeper levels of the Vatican Archives, eventually you'll hear whispers about it. And if you're unlucky like me, you'll be assigned to guard it. My name is Marcus Cole, former British Royal Marine, and for the past 3 years, I've been working private security for the Holy See. The pay is exceptional, the benefits are extraordinary, and the work is usually mundane. Checking credentials, monitoring cameras, escorting visiting scholars through restricted areas of the archives. Standard protection detail work, just with more religious artifacts and priceless manuscripts than your average assignment. Everything changed 6 months ago when Cardinal Benedetti called me into his office at 2 in the morning. I'd never met him before, though I knew his reputation. He was one of the few people with unrestricted access to every corner of Vatican City, including areas that officially don't exist. When a man like that summons you in the dead of night, you don't ask questions. You just go. His office was deep underground, far below the tourist areas, past the known archives, through corridors that seemed to grow older and darker the further you descended. The stone walls down there aren't the renovated climate-controlled passages of the main archives. They're ancient, medieval, maybe older, the kind of stone that remembers things. Cardinal Benedetti was waiting for me, standing beside a desk covered in documents written in Latin. He was older than I expected, perhaps in his 80s, with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen things that aged him beyond his years. His eyes were sharp, though, disturbingly alert for someone his age, and they studied me with an intensity that made my combat training feel inadequate. "Mr. Cole," he said without preamble, his English accented but precise, "you have been selected for a very specific assignment, one that requires absolute discretion, unwavering discipline, and most importantly, the ability to follow instructions without deviation. Your military record suggests you possess these qualities. I sincerely hope that assessment is correct, because the consequences of failure in this position are not merely professional. They are existential." He handed me a leather-bound journal, old and worn, filled with handwritten entries in multiple languages. Some pages were in Latin, others in Italian, a few in languages I couldn't identify. But there were sections in English, added by previous guards, and as I flipped through them, a cold sensation crept up my spine. "This journal contains the collective knowledge of every guard who has served at Room 0, the Cardinal continued. "Some of those men served for decades. Others lasted mere weeks. Each one added their observations, their warnings, their desperate attempts to understand what they were guarding. You will read this journal completely before beginning your assignment. You will memorize the rules, and you will add your own observations as time permits." "What exactly is Room 0? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The Cardinal's expression darkened. "Room 0 is a prison, the oldest and most important prison the Church maintains. What it contains cannot be destroyed, cannot be moved, and must never, under any circumstances, be released. Your job is to ensure that never happens. The rules in that journal are not suggestions, Mr. Cole. They are the accumulated wisdom of centuries of guardianship. Men died learning these rules. Others went mad. A few simply vanished, though their screams can still be heard sometimes in the deeper corridors." He walked to a wall safe, opened it with 3 different keys, and removed a single brass key attached to a chain. "This key opens the security door to the corridor that leads to Room 0. You will wear it around your neck at all times during your shift. You will never, under any circumstances, remove it while on duty, and you will never, ever use it to actually enter Room 0 itself. The room has its own door, and that door has no lock. It doesn't need one." I took the key, feeling its unusual weight. It was warm to the touch, though it had been in a safe. "Why doesn't the room need a lock?" "Because nothing that enters Room 0 can leave. the Cardinal said softly. Not even time itself. That was 6 months ago. I've been guarding room 0 ever since, working the night shift from midnight to 6 a.m., 6 days a week. The Cardinal was right about the journal. Reading it was the most terrifying experience of my life, and I've been in combat zones. But nothing prepared me for the entries in that journal, the desperate scrawlings of men who'd stood guard in the same corridor where I now spend my nights. The rules were compiled over centuries, each one learned through tragedy or near disaster. Some entries end mid-sentence, the handwriting deteriorating into illegible scratches. Others are written in what appears to be blood, though I try not to think about that. But certain rules appear in every guard's entries, repeated and emphasized, sometimes underlined multiple times or written in all capitals. These are the rules that keep you alive. Rule 1. Never enter the corridor leading to room 0 before exactly midnight, not 11:59 p.m., not 12:01 a.m., exactly midnight. Set multiple watches. Check them obsessively. The door to the corridor is always unlocked from the inside, and previous guards have reported that entering even 30 seconds early results in temporal displacement. One guard entered at 11:58 p.m. and emerged, from his perspective, 2 minutes later. From the perspective of those waiting outside, he'd been gone for 3 days. He was never the same afterward, constantly mumbling about the faces he'd seen in the darkness, about voices that spoke in languages that predated human speech. Rule 2. Upon entering the corridor at exactly midnight, you must immediately lock the security door behind you and check that it's secure. You will hear sounds from the other side of that door throughout your shift. Scratching, breathing, sometimes voices that sound like people you know, begging to be let in. These are not real. Room 0 has a way of projecting things. The door must remain locked until exactly 6:04 a.m., no matter what you hear. A guard named Thomas Brennan broke this rule in 1987. His journal entry from that night describes hearing his daughter crying outside the door, calling for him, saying she was hurt and afraid. He opened the door to help her. His daughter was actually safe at home in Dublin, over 1,000 miles away. What came through that door when he opened it was something else. They found Thomas 3 days later, or what was left of him. The autopsy reported cause of death as extreme old age. Thomas was 32 years old. Rule 3. The corridor to room 0 is exactly 143 steps long. You must count every step as you walk it. If you count more than 143 steps, stop immediately, turn around, and walk back to the security door. Do not proceed to room 0. One guard counted 157 steps. He ignored the rule and continued to the room. When they found him the next morning, his body was positioned at the door, but his corpse had decomposed to the point of skeletonization. The medical examiner estimated the body had been dead for approximately 70 years. His shift had only been 6 hours. Rule 4. There is a chair positioned exactly 10 feet from the door to room 0. You must sit in this chair for the entirety of your shift. Do not stand. Do not walk around. Do not approach the door to room 0 under any circumstances. The chair is bolted to the floor for a reason. Previous guards who wandered the corridor reported progressive time dilation the closer they got to room 0's door. One guard walked to within 5 feet of the door and stood there for what he thought was a few seconds. When he returned to his chair, his watch showed that 4 hours had passed. Rule 5. You will hear sounds coming from inside room 0. Chanting, screaming, crying, laughing. Sometimes it will sound like liturgical music, but played backward or at wrong speeds. Sometimes it will sound like modern music, songs that haven't been written yet. Do not try to identify the sounds. Do not listen too intently. Keep your mind occupied with the prayers provided in the journal. Father Marco Santini, who guarded the room for 12 years in the 1950s, wrote extensive notes about the sounds. He tried to catalog them to find patterns. His final entry reads, "I understand now. The sounds aren't coming from inside the room. They're coming from when the room is, or was, or will be, all of it at once. God forgive me, I looked at the door too long, and now I can see it too. All time happening simultaneously. Every moment that ever was, or will be, compressed into that single room. I can see my death. It's beautiful and terrible. I think I'll go inside now. Father Santini was never seen again. Rule 6. Approximately once per shift, the door to room 0 will open slightly. Just a crack, an inch or two. When this happens, do not look at the opening. Turn your head away immediately and keep your eyes closed until you hear the door close again. This usually takes between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. What's inside room 0 is aware of observers. It wants to be seen. A guard named Patricia Moss broke this rule in 2003. She was the first woman assigned to guard the room, and according to her journal entries, she believed the rules were exaggerated, products of masculine hysteria and superstition. When the door opened during her third shift, she looked directly at the opening. She maintained her gaze for 15 seconds before looking away. She completed her shift and reported nothing unusual. But over the following weeks, her entries became increasingly disturbed. She wrote about dreams where she existed in multiple times simultaneously, being born and dying in the same moment. She described feeling herself age and regress, growing older and younger with each heartbeat. On her 47th day, she entered the corridor and never came out. They found her 3 days later, sitting in the guard chair. She appeared to be in her 20s physically, but when they spoke to her, she responded in the confused manner of someone with advanced dementia. She's still alive, kept in a private church facility. She's been 23 years old for over 15 years now, but her mind is ancient, scattered across decades that haven't happened yet. Rule 7. You must bring a digital watch with you, one that displays both date and time. Check it every 10 minutes. If the date ever changes while you're on shift, evacuate the corridor immediately, regardless of what time it shows. Do not return to the room until you've reported the incident to the Cardinal. Room 0 occasionally experiences temporal surges. During these events, time inside the corridor can slip forward or backward by days, weeks, or even years. A guard named Heinrich Wolf experienced this in 1978. He checked his watch at 2 a.m. and saw it read March 15, 1978. He checked it again at 2:10 a.m. and it read March 15, 1981. He immediately evacuated. Upon exiting the corridor, he found that outside, it was still March 15, 1978. But during that 10-minute period, from his perspective, 3 years had passed inside the corridor. He was 3 years older. His hair had grown. His beard was long. His clothes had deteriorated. Most disturbingly, he had no memory of those 3 years. Just a 10-minute gap in his consciousness, but his body had lived through 36 months in the space between seconds. Rule 8. If you hear footsteps in the corridor behind you approaching from the direction of the security door, do not turn around. The corridor is sealed. Nothing can enter from that direction. The footsteps are a projection from room 0, an attempt to make you break position and investigate. Remain in your chair, facing the door to room 0. The footsteps will eventually stop, usually just behind your chair. You may feel breath on the back of your neck. You may feel something touch your hair or shoulder. Do not react. Do not turn around. After a few minutes, the presence will fade. A guard named Robert Chen turned around to confront the presence during his second week. He described seeing himself standing behind his chair, but wrong somehow. The eyes were too large. The mouth smiled too wide. It spoke to him in his own voice, telling him things about his future, about how he would die, about what waited for him in room 0. Robert completed his shift, but never returned to work. He committed suicide 3 days later. His note said only, It was right about everything. I can't live through what's coming. Rule 9. You are provided with a thermos of holy water blessed by the Pope himself. Take a small sip every hour. This isn't for hydration. The holy water provides protection against the temporal and spiritual effects of room zero's proximity. Without it, extended exposure to the room will begin to erode your connection to linear time. One guard forgot his thermos one night and decided to proceed anyway. By hour 3, he began experiencing what he described as time echoes, seeing multiple versions of himself from different moments in his shift, occupying the corridor simultaneously. By hour 5, according to his journal entry, he could see his past and future selves stretching in both directions through time. He wrote, "There are infinite versions of me in this corridor. I can see the me from an hour ago, still fresh and afraid. I can see the me from an hour in the future, already broken, and I can see further. I can see a version of me that's been sitting in this chair for decades, centuries, aging and dying and aging again, trapped in an eternal shift that never ends. Is that my future, or just one possible future? I don't know anymore. Time isn't a line, it's a circle, and room zero is the center." Rule 10. If the lights in the corridor begin to flicker, close your eyes immediately and begin reciting the Lord's Prayer in Latin. Continue praying until the flickering stops. The lights flicker when room zero's influence is strongest, when it's trying to expand its effect beyond its physical boundaries. During these moments, temporal rifts can open in the corridor, and you may glimpse other times, other places. One guard made the mistake of keeping his eyes open during a flicker event. He saw the corridor as it existed in different centuries, overlapping and intersecting. He saw medieval monks walking through the same space where he sat. He saw future versions of the corridor, empty and dark, abandoned. But worst of all, he saw what was in room zero during different time periods, how it had changed and not changed, how it had always been there and would always be there. He never spoke again. He sits in that same church facility where Patricia Moss is kept, staring at nothing, occasionally mumbling numbers in languages no living scholar can identify. I learned these rules by heart before my first shift. I thought I was prepared. The Marine Corps trained me to face fear, to operate under extreme stress, to follow orders without hesitation. But nothing prepares you for room zero. Nothing prepares you for guarding something that exists outside of time, that was old when the universe was young, that will still be there when everything else has ended. My first shift was relatively calm. I entered the corridor at exactly midnight, counted exactly 143 steps, and sat in the chair. I could see the door to room 0, about 10 feet ahead, a simple wooden door, medieval in design with iron fixtures. It looked absurdly normal, like something you'd find in any old church or castle. But there was something wrong about it, something that made your eyes slide away if you looked at it too long. The wood grain seemed to move slightly, though that might have been a trick of the dim lighting. The door sat slightly askew in its frame, as if the stone around it had shifted over centuries, but the door itself remained unchanged. I heard sounds almost immediately, distant chanting like monks at prayer, but the words were wrong. They sounded like Latin backwards, or Latin that hadn't been invented yet. The melody was beautiful and terrible at the same time, harmonies that shouldn't exist. I focused on the prayers in the journal, using them to keep my mind occupied. Around 2:00 a.m., I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching from the security door. I kept my eyes forward, my hands gripping the arms of the chair. The footsteps reached my chair and stopped. I felt something standing directly behind me. The temperature dropped noticeably. I could see my breath forming clouds in the air. Then I felt it. Fingers in my hair, gentle, almost affectionate, running through my hair the way my mother used to when I was a child. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to confront whatever was touching me. But I remembered Robert Chen. I remained still, barely breathing, while those impossible fingers stroked my hair. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, the presence withdrew. The temperature returned to normal. I was alone again. At 4 a.m., the door to room 0 opened. Just a crack, maybe an inch. I immediately turned my head away and closed my eyes. The journal had warned me about this, but the temptation to look was overwhelming. What could be so terrible that merely glimpsing it could destroy a person's connection to linear time? I kept my eyes shut tight, counting seconds in my head. I made it to 120 before the door closed again. When I opened my eyes, everything seemed normal, but my watch showed that only 30 seconds had passed. Time moved differently during the opening. 90 seconds in my head had been 30 seconds in reality. Or had it been the reverse? Had I actually counted for 30 seconds and the outside world had experienced 90? Room 0 made these questions impossible to answer. I completed my first shift without incident and emerged from the corridor at exactly 6 a.m. Cardinal Benedetti was waiting for me. As I later learned, he waited after every guard's first shift. He studied my face carefully, looking for something. "You followed the rules," he said. It wasn't a question. "Good. Write your observations in the journal, even details that seem insignificant. Future guards may find them useful." That was 6 months ago. I've completed over 150 shifts since then, and I've learned things the journal didn't mention, things the previous guards either didn't experience or didn't live long enough to document. Room 0 is evolving, or perhaps it's always been this way and we're only now beginning to understand it. The sounds from inside the room have become more frequent, more varied. I've heard conversations in English discussing current events that haven't happened yet. I've heard news broadcasts from the future describing wars and disasters that are apparently coming. I've heard my own voice sometimes, speaking words I've never said, having conversations I've never had. Is that really my future self? Somehow trapped or recorded in Room 0's temporal distortion? Or is it something else? Something using my voice to try to confuse me? The door opens more frequently now. It used to happen once per shift. Now it's 3 or 4 times, sometimes more. And each time it opens, it stays open a little longer. Last week, it remained open for nearly 5 minutes. I kept my eyes averted, but I could feel something in that opening, watching me, studying me. The air that drifted out from Room 0 during those 5 minutes was strange. It smelled like ozone and incense and something else, something organic and wrong, like meat that's been aging for centuries. Worst of all are the echoes I've started experiencing. Despite drinking the holy water regularly, I occasionally see flickers of other times. I'll be sitting in my chair, and for just a moment, I'll see other guards who sat in the same chair. Sometimes they're from decades ago, wearing different uniforms, using different equipment. Sometimes they appear to be from the future, with technology I don't recognize. And sometimes I see myself, multiple versions of me from different moments and different shifts, all occupying the corridor simultaneously. It lasts only a second or two, but it's happening more frequently. I've documented all of this in the journal, adding my observations to the centuries of entries before mine. The Cardinal reads my reports with increasing concern. 2 weeks ago, he told me that Room 0 is becoming more active. The Church's most learned scholars, people with access to knowledge that would terrify the public, believe that Room 0 is approaching some kind of threshold. What that means exactly, nobody seems willing or able to explain. But I've drawn my own conclusions based on what I've experienced and what I've read in the journal. Room 0 doesn't just exist outside of time. It's a fixed point where all time converges, past, present, and future, all compressed into a single moment, a single space. And whatever is imprisoned in that room exists simultaneously in all those times. It's always been there. It's there now. It will always be there. But it's also getting stronger, or perhaps time itself is weakening around it. 3 nights ago, something new happened. At 3 a.m., my watch suddenly displayed a date from 500 years in the future. I immediately prepared to evacuate, as the rules demanded. But before I could stand, the date snapped back to the present. Then it jumped to 300 years in the past. Then forward again, bouncing through time like a stone skipping across water. This continued for nearly 30 seconds before stabilizing. I completed my shift, but when I checked my watch outside the corridor, it showed that an entire month had passed. From my perspective, it had been a normal 6-hour shift, but outside everyone thought I'd been missing for 30 days. Cardinal Benedetti had been about to open the corridor to search for me. The physical toll has been significant. I'm aging differently now. Some days I wake up and look years older. Other days I appear younger, like time is flowing backward through my body. My hair has started growing in strange patterns, sections that are white while others remain dark. My hands sometimes look ancient, covered in age spots and wrinkles, then appear youthful again hours later. The doctors the Vatican employs have no explanation. They've documented my condition but can offer no treatment. I dream about room 0 now. Not nightmares exactly, but dreams where I exist in multiple times simultaneously. I'm a child in my home in Manchester. I'm an old man dying in a hospital bed. I'm a soldier in Afghanistan. I'm sitting in the guard chair in the corridor. All of these are happening at the same moment, and I'm aware of all of them. The version of me that's guarding room 0 in my dreams knows things the waking me doesn't. That version has been sitting in that chair for decades, centuries. He's watched empires rise and fall. He's seen the Vatican crumble into ruins and rebuild itself. He's seen the end of the world and the beginning of whatever comes after. And he's still sitting there, still guarding the door, because in the timeless space around room 0, shifts never really end. Last night was the worst yet. I entered the corridor at midnight, counted 143 steps, and sat in my chair. Everything seemed normal at first, but at 2 a.m., the door to room 0 didn't just open, it swung wide, completely open, giving me a full view of what lay beyond if I chose to look. The temptation was unbearable. After 6 months of guarding this door, of following rules written in blood and desperation, I wanted to know. What could be so terrible that the Church has guarded it for centuries? What could be so dangerous that it required these elaborate rules and precautions? I kept my eyes averted, but I could see the room in my peripheral vision. It wasn't large, maybe 15 feet square, with stone walls and a vaulted ceiling. The room was empty except for a single object in the center. I couldn't make out details without looking directly at it, but it appeared to be a chair or throne of some kind, and something was sitting in it. Something that had been sitting there for a very, very long time. The presence spoke to me, not in words, not in any language I could identify, but I understood it nonetheless. It communicated in concepts, in emotions, in sensations that bypassed language entirely. It told me that room 0 wasn't a prison. It was an anchor. The thing in that chair was holding time itself in place, preventing it from collapsing in on itself, from becoming a chaotic jumble of past and future with no present. It had been sitting there since before time existed, maintaining the structure of causality, ensuring that effects followed causes, that the universe progressed from past to future rather than existing as an incomprehensible simultaneous whole. But it was tired. It had been maintaining time's structure for eons, and it wanted to rest. It wanted someone to take its place, to sit in that chair and become the new anchor. And it had chosen me. It had been preparing me for months, exposing me gradually to temporal distortions, teaching my body and mind to exist outside of linear time. The aging and de-aging, the echoes of other times, the dreams of simultaneous existence. All of it had been training. If I chose to enter room 0 and take its place, I would become the new temporal anchor. I would sit in that chair for the next several billion years, maintaining the structure of time itself, experiencing every moment of the universe's history simultaneously, forever. The alternative, it suggested, was that it would simply stop. It would let go of time structure and allow everything to collapse into temporal chaos. Past and future would merge. Cause and effect would become meaningless. Every moment that had ever existed or would ever exist would happen simultaneously, and human consciousness, designed to experience time linearly, would shatter trying to process it all at once. I don't know how long I sat there with the door open, receiving this information. My watch later showed that 4 hours had passed, but I have no memory of those hours beyond the communication from the thing in the chair. When I finally became aware of my surroundings again, the door was closed. My shift was ending. It was 5:55 a.m. I left the corridor at exactly 6 a.m. and immediately went to Cardinal Benedetti. I told him everything. He listened without interruption, his ancient face growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he stood and walked to a bookshelf, removing a document that looked older than the Vatican itself. "What you've learned," he said slowly, "is the truth that only a few church officials have ever known. Room zero contains what we call the Chronos entity. It's not God, though it's the closest thing to God that exists in our physical universe. It maintains the structure of time itself. Every few thousand years, it chooses a successor and transfers its burden to them. The previous Chronos entity chose the current one during the reign of Caesar Augustus. Before that, we have no records, though the Church believes this cycle has been ongoing since time itself began." "So, what the journal calls imprisonment," I said, "is actually service." "Yes," the Cardinal confirmed. "The Chronos entity serves as the anchor of time, but it must do so willingly. It cannot be forced or compelled. It must choose this burden freely, understanding the full weight of what it's accepting. Previous entities have served for thousands of years, some longer. But eventually, all of them reach a point where they can serve no longer. When that happens, they must find a successor who will accept the burden willingly. And if they don't find one," the Cardinal's expression became grave, "then time itself will unravel. The Chronos entity has been warning us for decades that its time is ending. That's why we've intensified the guard rotations, why we've been so careful in selecting guards. We've been hoping it would choose someone who could accept the burden, someone with the strength to willingly enter room zero and take its place. It chose me," I said quietly. "Yes, and now you must decide. Will you enter room zero and become the new temporal anchor? Will you sit in that chair for the next several millennia, maintaining time's structure, experiencing every moment of history simultaneously, giving up your linear existence to ensure that time continues for everyone else? Or will you refuse and risk the collapse of temporal structure itself?" I went home after that conversation. I've been sitting in my apartment for 3 days now trying to make this decision. The Cardinal has given me until tomorrow night. After that, he says, the current Chronos entity may not be able to maintain time's structure any longer. The temporal distortions around room zero have been increasing. Clocks throughout the Vatican are running at different speeds. People are experiencing time slips, finding themselves displaced by minutes or hours. If something doesn't change soon, the distortions will spread beyond the Vatican, beyond Rome, eventually consuming the entire world. I keep thinking about what it would mean to accept this burden, to sit in that chair for thousands of years, existing in all times simultaneously, to experience the birth and death of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, every moment of joy and suffering that has ever occurred or ever will occur, all happening at once. To lose my linear existence, my identity as Marcus Cole, and become instead a fixed point around which all of time revolves. But I also think about what will happen if I refuse. The collapse of temporal structure wouldn't be quick or merciful. It would be chaos. People would experience their entire lives simultaneously. Children would remember being elderly. The dead would overlap with the living. Cause and effect would become meaningless. The universe would become an incomprehensible jumble of every moment happening at once, and human consciousness would shatter trying to process it. I dream about the chair every night now. In my dreams, I'm already sitting in it. I've been sitting in it forever. I can see the corridor outside room 0, and I watch guards come and go. I see them across centuries, all of them simultaneously. I see myself entering the corridor for my first shift 6 months ago. I see myself entering the corridor last night. I see myself entering the corridor 1,000 years from now. All of it happening at once, because when you're the anchor of time, there is no before or after. There's only the eternal present, the single moment that contains all moments. The thing that terrifies me most is that part of me wants this. After 6 months of guarding room 0, of experiencing temporal distortions and time slips, linear existence feels limiting. I've glimpsed what it's like to exist outside of time, to experience multiple moments simultaneously, and despite the horror of it, despite the wrongness, there's something appealing about it, a completeness that linear life can never offer. My shift begins in 6 hours. The Cardinal will be waiting for my answer. I think I already know what I'm going to say. I can feel the weight of time pressing down on me. Feel the Chronos entity's desperation. Feel the structure of causality beginning to fray at the edges. Someone has to sit in that chair. Someone has to maintain the anchor. And it chose me. Maybe it chose me because I'm strong enough to bear this burden. Maybe it chose me because I'm weak enough to be manipulated into accepting it. I don't know anymore. After 6 months of guarding room 0, I'm not sure I know anything except the time is more fragile than anyone realizes, and someone has to maintain it. So tonight, I'll enter the corridor at exactly midnight. I'll count exactly 143 steps, but instead of sitting in the guard chair, I'll keep walking. I'll walk those final 10 feet to the door of room 0. I'll open it, and I'll enter. I'll sit in the chair that's waited there since before time began. I'll take the place of the entity that's maintained temporal structure for thousands of years. And I'll begin my service, experiencing every moment of the universe's existence simultaneously, forever. By the time you read this, I'll have been sitting in that chair for billions of years and no time at all. I'll have watched your birth and death in the same instant. I'll have seen the beginning and end of everything continuously without pause. And centuries from now, when my time finally ends, when the weight becomes too much to bear, I'll do what the current Chronos entity did. I'll choose a successor. I'll find someone strong enough, or foolish enough, or desperate enough to take my place. I'll guide them through months of temporal distortions, teaching them to exist outside of linear time, preparing them for the burden. And when they're ready, I'll offer them the same choice I'm about to accept. That's the real truth about room 0. It's not a prison, it's a sacrifice. Someone sits in that room, experiencing all of time simultaneously, maintaining the structure of causality, ensuring that the universe progresses from past to future rather than collapsing into chaos. And someone always will. Because if that chair is ever empty, even for a moment, time itself will end. So if you ever find yourself working security at the Vatican and they offer you a position guarding something called Room 0, refuse. Walk away. Find a different job. Because once you enter that corridor, once you begin experiencing the temporal distortions, once you glimpse what exists outside of linear time, you're already marked. The Chronos entity is already preparing you, teaching you, grooming you to take its place. And eventually, you'll make the same choice I'm about to make. You'll enter room 0, you'll sit in the chair, and you'll maintain time's structure for the next several millennia, existing in every moment, simultaneously, forever. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but someone has to do it, and tonight, that someone is me. In 6 hours, Marcus Cole will cease to exist as a linear being, but the Chronos entity will continue, maintaining time structure, ensuring that you can read these words in a sequential order that cause precedes effect, that the universe progresses from moment to moment rather than collapsing into incomprehensible chaos. You're welcome, and I'm sorry, both simultaneously, for all eternity. This is my final journal entry as Marcus Cole, human British Royal Marine Vatican Security Guard. By the time you read this, I'll be something else, something that exists in all times at once, something that maintains the structure that allows you to experience time linearly. Remember me, or don't. From where I'm going, it's all the same moment anyway. Goodbye.